This is exciting. For me, this is the biggest event that we've ever had for consciousness hacking. We have about 500 people here tonight. So thank you all for your interest, your excitement, and being part of this community. For those of you that are new, I want to give you a sense of what consciousness hacking is really quick. First, it's a global community. We just onboarded our newest chapter yesterday, Austin, Texas. We have about 30 chapters around the world, and they sort of keep coming. It's grassroots, it's organic. We've never set out to say we want to have chapters around the world. People are just interested in this topic, in this space. And the space that we're in is at the intersection of technology and consciousness. And what we're exploring as a community, as consciousness hacking, is really the same topic that we're going to be exploring tonight in this conversation. And one way of thinking about it in the context of tonight is this idea of spiritual innovation. This recognition that we have been using tools as part of the spiritual path for thousands of years. In a sense, meditation is a tool. And the temple that we meditate in is a tool. Even the spiritual instruction is a tool. And what we're really interested in consciousness hacking, is what does that look like in the modern age? How do we use science? How do we use technology? And in this case, how do we use psychedelics in order to support people's awakening, in order to support people's transformation, their healing, their connection to themselves and each other in the most innovative and the most helpful way possible. And to give you a sense of kind of who's here in the space, to kind of who is this community, I have 3 questions which kind of characterize the people that are usually in the room at a consciousness hacking event. First question, raise your hand if you are involved in technology in some way. So look around, usually about 85%, something 90%. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you have some kind of spiritual practice, yoga, meditation, whatever it might be. Okay, so look around, almost everybody. So now here's a third interesting question. This is kind of the glue that unites a lot of people. Raise your hand, this is kind of a long one, so gotta pay attention. I can't find a shorter way of saying this, so let me know later if you've got a better one. Raise your hand if you are planning to, or you already have, left some kind of conventional life path to pursue something that is more in line with a deeper sense of purpose. This is consciousness hacking, ladies and gentlemen. And I love you all. Yeah, there we go. And I think we could say that the same thing is true for our 2 speakers who I'm going to introduce, our 2, I should say, conversation partners here, Vincent Horn and Michael Taft. So I want to start with introducing Mr. Michael Taft. You may know him from the Deconstructing Yourself podcast, which is, along with Vincent's podcast, 2 of the most interesting and relevant conversations happening online today, if you're interested in these topics. So check that out. But Michael also has an amazing book, it's called Mindful Geek. And it's also really one of the seminal books at this intersection point of tech, mindfulness, consciousness. He's been a serious practitioner for over 40 years. He's told me some pretty crazy story about times he spent in caves with critters roaming around and running out of food. He's pretty hardcore, but he's also been teaching for well over a decade. And he actually teaches right up the street at a place called the SF Dharma Collective every Thursday night. So if you want to sit and practice with Michael, it's about 3 or 4 blocks away. So I guess the last thing to say about Michael is This is a lifelong interest of his. He's been playing with brain tech and neurotech since the 80s. He was telling me a story about him and William Burroughs sitting down and playing with mind hacking technology together. So I'm really excited to have Michael a part of this conversation. Mr. Michael Taft, can you come on stage? There he is, ladies and gentlemen. And I forgot to mention how handsome he is, by the way. I forgot to mention how handsome he is. Whichever one you want. Okay, and then, and then, so we also have Vincent Horn. So Vince and I actually go pretty far back. Vince was the first voice that I heard in the space when I decided this was what I wanted to pursue. He had a podcast called the Buddhist Geeks podcast. How many people have actually heard of the Buddhist Geeks podcast? So it's been around for quite a few years. And the very first interview that I ever did was on the Buddhist Geeks podcast. So you could say Vince discovered me. Does that make sense? I don't know, something like that. But Vince and I have since actually become really good friends. Part of what makes this conversation relevant is I probably had, I asked him before if I could say this, I probably had one of the most memorable psychedelic experiences of my life, sitting in my cabin in Santa Cruz on a couch with Vincent Horn, where we literally unified into a single mind. We still talk about it today. We talked about it about 20 minutes ago sitting on stage. Remember that time where there was like just one mind and two people? Yeah. So we've been there, which means we're qualified to. You might notice that we might complete each other's words. That's a side effect of that experience that we had a while back. So if you want to see Vince in action, he's actually going to be teaching this Thursday night in place of Michael at the SF Dharma Collective a few blocks away. Mr. Vincent Horn, please come on stage. So the way this is going to happen tonight is it's going to be kind of me asking some questions, but I can't help but also answering them because I'm just like, as you've noticed, I like to talk. So there's going to be a lot of conversation, but the other big thing is you're going to be included in the conversation. So every once in a while, we're going to turn a question your direction, and you're going to turn to your neighbor, and you're going to have a few minutes to explore it, and then we're going to bring it back, hear from a few of you, and then continue the conversation. So just so you know, you don't get to be passive, so be ready to get your brain juices flowing. So I want to set the stage for our conversation tonight. And the tone I want to set is not just a kind of a forward-looking tone, sort of looking into the future, even though that's in the title. But I actually want to really point out that the future is here, that there is some sci-fi stuff that is already happening, and that there is already a revolution in the way that we know ourselves, in the way that we walk the spiritual path that's actually emerging into our modern culture. One example of this I want to give is a project that is being spearheaded by a neuroscientist named Jay Sanguinetti. We had him speaking at an event a few months ago. Who was at that event, out of curiosity? Okay, a couple people. You all missed it. So Jay has been a professor in New Mexico, running a lab there, working on a technology called ultrasound brain stimulation. This is a type of technology which is going to be one of these technologies that is going to change the way we can change the way the brain works, because it can really precisely change activity in very specific parts of the brain. You can actually focus it on an area smaller than a grain of rice. So it's really precise. And Jay's meditation teacher is a well-known teacher named Shinzen Young, who some of you may have heard of. And they've been practicing, some of you know him, for quite a while. And Shinzen is quite the geek. And he came up with a theory, a certain part of the brain that he thought would be deeply impactful to accelerating the contemplative path. And so him and Jay worked together, and ultimately Jay began to test this theory out and began to stimulate Shinzen's brain in this way. Shinzen has been teaching and practicing meditation for close to 50 years. He's done countless retreats. And I sat down in conversation with him the other day, and he said that the stimulation that he received from this ultrasound was the single most impactful intervention in his entire meditation career. Not only that, there's a handful of other experienced meditation teachers that have also experienced the stimulation technology, who have also described it as one of the most potent interventions that they've also received on their entire meditation path, resulting in a distinct and lasting change in their subjective experience. This is one example of the type of technology that we're going to begin to see emerging faster and faster into the world. We're also seeing folks like Michael Pollan bringing psychedelics into the mainstream, along with MAPS and Johns Hopkins University and other universities who are pushing the research forward, and we're actually seeing the realistic possibility of the legalization of psychedelics for therapeutic use, which is really exciting. And so with technology advancing as it is, and psychedelics actually facing real legalization, we're actually witnessing the democratization of awakening. We're witnessing this potential world where the tools that can support dramatic and deep shifts in our subjective experience are actually going to be made increasingly universally available through your cell phones, through virtual reality, through wearables. And so the conversation that we're having tonight is, what are the implications of that? What are the dangers of that? What happens when insurance companies start having ideas about what awakening is and then giving discounts depending on how awakened you are? What happens when we start patenting certain states of consciousness? What happens when what one person thinks is awakening 10 years later we realize is actually incredibly harmful and destructive to society? So I want to actually start things off first by taking a question to you. You're all probably very familiar with this space and the ideas in the space. It's not the first time you're hearing about them. So turn to your neighbor, take just a few minutes, talk about what you're most excited about and what you're most afraid of in this brave new world of technological awakening. Go. Turn to your neighbor. Ideally someone you haven't met. Can we hear from just a couple people? Do we have our audience mics ready to run around like crazy? Josh, do we have our runners? All right. Can we get one right up here in the front?
Test.
Glenn's running. Oh, Glenn's got to do the soundboard and run? That's a lot for Glenn. Thanks, Glenn. Wait, and then who's next, just so we know? Who else wanted to say something? Let's do, anyone else? How about right there in the back with your hand up? Can you leave your hand up and we'll take another microphone to you? Okay.
All right. So for me, the thing that's most interesting is the possibility that we awaken into actual direct collective consciousness. So what you said you and Vince shared, and that one mind and two bodies, I imagine that being the case across a wider number of people. And we were talking about how in Burning Man there is a collective group flow state that happens. But in some way it's very difficult to talk about that to anybody who hasn't been there. And in some way, for me, what I've thought of is Helen Keller as an example of someone who didn't have symbolic language or some way to communicate. When it came online, it was like, oh my God, now I know there's something here. Tell me more of the vocabulary, right? And so the collective flow state as being something that we're just awakening to, and being able to have that actually be a domain of conversation, so that we awaken to that level of consciousness to be able to continue that, to broaden that, and have a new vocabulary for this, and broaden it. So,
I love that. Vince, do you want to respond to that one really quick? And I have a response too.
Well, I wanted to go back to your story. I'm glad you told it and I wasn't out on stage, because I was sort of like, of us having the one
I knew
mind.
you were going to say that, by the way. Just kidding.
Of course you did. But the one mind experience is one of many collective kind of weird experiences, that I've experienced at this end. And it seems like it's really, new terrain. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight was that the question I came into that session with you, because it was very much a meditative inquiry, a collaborative inquiry, was, who are we? So it's the classical spiritual question, who am I? And I was like, well, who are we? What is that? Who is that we? So for me, that experience was the response to the question. It was the answer in a certain way, or a glimpse of an answer. So collective inquiry is an interesting way to practice.
And just a quick side note, we were talking about earlier today, this has been a major, and in a unique way, a major focus of your teaching.
Yeah, I'm so excited about social meditation practice that I can't stop talking about it, and it's probably annoying everyone around me. And Michael, you've talked about Shinzen in a very loving way as having that characteristic as well, where
He gets very excited about
you get
the meditation practices that he's putting out there.
Right, and where's the line between excitement and obsession? That's always been my personal inquiry.
We just had Daniel Ingram in town, and he's going up to teach a fire casino retreat. And
yeah, I wish I was going to be there.
Yeah, for the 2 days that he was here, it was just continuous excitement about the fire casino.
Yes,
awesome.
Yes, hyper enthusiasm.
So this is a topic that I'm excited, borderline obsessed about as well. And actually, I just a few weeks ago got finished running a month-long research lab at Esalen, which was the first time that they'd ever done anything like this. And I was experimenting with this technology platform that I call the Group Flow technology platform, because personally, I'm so interested in how technology can help to connect people to each other. Because for me, that is deeply needed. It's something that I've been learning and needing in my life, and realizing that it's not a luxury, that actually deep and meaningful human connection is part of what we need to be a healthy, thriving human being. And at the same time, we have an epidemic of loneliness. We're somewhere between 2 and 3 times lonelier than we were 50 years ago. And so this technology platform can take up to 24 people at a time, measure what's happening in their breath, in their heart, in their brain, and in electrodermal response, which is skin conductivity. It's like emotional arousal. And then can turn that into sound and light and music. And we can create these kinds of collective experiences of self-awareness where, for example, Michael and I could be sitting next to each other and actually gazing into each other's eyes, a practice we love doing together.
We love doing that.
We could do it for hours, just hours. And actually hearing each other's heartbeat, and actually holding each other's pulsing heart in our hands as a glowing light. And this creates a deeply humanizing experience where we can sit in the circle and the entire room through a PA system could hear my heartbeat and see my heartbeat as they practice a loving kindness meditation towards me. And so, or we could do a collective breathing together by turning the group's breath into sound and light. And so there's all these ways in which you can create these kinds of deep collective experiences. So I could talk about that for an hour, but just to say, look at this is our first question. We're already 20 minutes into it. But just to say, I think that this collective perspective, the interpersonal perspective on awakening and how technology can support that in the world is really important. And I believe that Facebook and folks like that are really clumsily, really awkwardly, and really poorly trying to do that, and we can do a hell of a lot better. Yeah. We had one comment over here. Hi. Oh, wait, we need sound. Okay. Maybe it sounds like it's on. Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Hi. So I think I remember the question.
Hi.
Hi.
The thing that I'm most excited about is creating safe and legal access to powerful tools of transformation that can empower each individual to have their own agency around their healing, and can empower them to get in right relationship with themselves and with each other and the planet. And I'm excited that I get to do that by working for MAPS, so that's pretty exciting. And the thing I'm most afraid of, or I get worried about, is the why, is how people answer the why. Why are you doing this work? Why are you seeking these experiences? Why are you building the tech that you're building? And I think intention matters so much right now in these formative places. And so I'm very wary of that. And then access for all, and how do we reach communities that are vastly different than the ones that we belong to, and translate the opportunity to heal with these tools into a way that they will rise to and want to receive. And so I'm really curious about how we're going to work with those questions.
Beautiful. That's awesome.
I have one response, which is open source. Open source your findings, your tech, and give it away. And that makes it way easier to access. And it's also can come from a place of deep generosity, which is a good idea from a contemplative perspective. So, great. That's awesome. And there many organizations are and do. That's where that's where I fall. I'm a digital communist, I guess. Something.
Yeah, and I would like to speak to the intention part. I think it's so fascinating that with any kind of awakening state, there is this characteristic of opening and sort of like vulnerability and the ability to take in new ideas. And even if awakening states are sort of pan-human and similar all around the world, which I think they are, the sense we make of those experiences is really different all around the world and even within cultures. And so there's this aspect, you said safe and legal. I love that word safe also, right? Or especially because, these tools are powerful and we need to use them well. But part of that safety is not just, providing a set and setting that is really healthy and productive, but also what sense you help guide the person into, or if you are doing it for yourself, what sense you make of it. Making sense that is good for yourself, good for other people, good for animals, good for the world is crucial. And we see how right now in our country, like how bad ideas can be really powerful, right? And the thing is, good ideas can be even more powerful, especially in these awakening contexts. So there's a kind of, I would say almost like meaning hygiene we have to exercise where we make good meaning out of these experiences.
Wow, thanks, Michael. I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon too and respond, because you hit into what I think is one of the most important topics in this area, which is around intention, or another way of saying it is the place from which we create. And there's this sort of unofficial motto for consciousness hacking, which is we are what we build and we build what we are. We create in our own image. And for me, the biggest bottleneck to creating what I would call truly nourishing technology that in a skillful and a holistic way, in a healthy way, supports our transformation, supports our awakening. For me, the biggest bottleneck is not some sort of scientific or technological breakthrough. The biggest bottleneck is actually our intentions, the intentions of the designers of the technology. And right now we have a lot of technology around us that's really designed primarily for profit, without a huge regard for how it makes people feel. And the more resource, the more innovation, the more energy that we have, driven by, fueled by the intention to actually support positive human experience, that will be the really big breakthrough that I think that we need to see, and we will see, hopefully. That's my optimistic Mikey coming out in Silicon Valley and beyond. So, so with that, my spiel, let's keep these questions going. So I wanna kind of look to the extreme a little bit. And I opened this up with this conversation around the ultrasound stimulation technology and kind of intentionally painting a really bold, strong picture of what's possible there. And what I've noticed is when I talk about those kinds of technologies, understandably people get a little bit nervous. And so I want to play with that nervousness a little bit. I want to dig into it a bit. I want to really imagine that this ultrasound technology is actually just the beginning. That it's almost inevitable that we will continue to understand the brain better, understand human physiology, understand how subjective experience relates to the mechanisms in our body, and we will develop more precise, more advanced technologies to change our experience, and that ultrasound tech will be nothing compared to what we might see in the future. And so what does it mean when we can create the equivalent of 10,000 hours of meditation at the push of a button? Is there a such thing as an enlightenment button? Can we actually imagine, does that even make sense, to imagine a technology or a chemical substance that is so precisely engineered, so advanced, that you could actually bring someone to the same depth of experience that might have taken 10 years meditating in a cave to achieve? And so I want to throw it to you first. Can there be an enlightenment button? How do you feel about the concept of an enlightenment button? What does that mean if there's an enlightenment button? Talk amongst yourselves, find a new partner to talk to, take a few minutes, and then we're going to come back and talk to the panelists. All right. So, can we hear from maybe two people? So, we have an excited hand over there, and then let me get our second one. I want to get a woman if I can. What? Oh, all right, right here in the front. Okay, so we got our two right there and right here, and then right there. Okay.
Is it me right now?
Sure.
Enlightenment button. I mean, what is it like? So at first, I was like, okay, that'd be really cool, but it's stuck in time. I mean, when one of the partners I talked to said, oh, that's ayahuasca, easy. And I was like, okay, well, if we were to reduce it down to something that simple, you could take ayahuasca at 20, you could take it at 30, take it at 50. Those are all very different experiences. And so if you have this enlightenment button pushed at age 10, is it predicting your future? Like, does it know your destiny? Does it take into account what you've done and what you've been? And that's where I really stretched my brain. I was like, is that possible? Is that can we achieve this sort of...
Are you like on ayahuasca now?
Should I be?
If you were, it'd be okay. You'd be welcome here.
I am not, but do you kind of catch my drift here?
Yeah. So actually, I kind of want to see what you guys have to say about this in essentially every major contemplative path. There is a notion of, going by different names, some version of awakening or different versions of awakening where there is a distinct and persistent shift in one's experience. And people talk about it as an actual thing that happened to them at this day, at this time, and their life from that point on had their experience had a distinctly different quality to it. And so, in a sense, you could ask the same question about the result of traditional practice of meditation. And I kind of would love your guys' commentary on that as well.
I already gave my comment.
Okay.
I would throw one, verbal distinction that I use often to kind of piece apart what you're describing, Mikey, about the kind of moment of awakening, and then, we could think of as the process. I tend to see awakening as a more process-oriented term, and enlightenment as a term that helps to kind of point at sort of major threshold changes and, big shifts that are permanent or seem to be. Those are valid questions, especially with high dose meditation experiences. That all of the enlightenment experiences I can point back to, these things that happened. Most of them happened during long silent periods of meditation, and it feels like the rest of my life has been more of just like this ongoing getting beat down and then somehow getting back up and going, okay, maybe I'll learn from this thing this time. That's how it feels. So and that's very almost schizophrenic in a way to have these profound moments of experience, and including I'd say on drugs. Some of the other one of the other enlightenment experiences seem to be related to a psychedelic journey in my case. So that seems totally feasible. But day to day, it doesn't, it's just like doing the laundry and responding to emails and trying to take a shower.
Well, this is why the idea of the enlightenment button is in a way not as interesting as the integration button. Right? Like, sure, we can have big awakenings, and then what happens or have had a lot of big awakenings, Vince, and it's like, what happens when you then leave that long silent retreat? It's a whole big process of integrating some aspects of that awakening into the rest of your life. And then you go do another retreat, and then a repeat, right? A long process of integration. And it does feel a lot like, getting kicked around. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, going back and forth. But maybe we can model it as schizophrenic, but to work.
That was a senior Vipassana teacher, insight meditation teacher, told me that was. She sometimes wondered if it was schizophrenic.
Yeah. I mean, to me, let's make a better meaning there and say, it's this natural back and forth of like a big opening and then slow integration, and big opening and slow integration. So I don't know, it's like, who has the integration button? That's the really interesting question. That's the part you want to speed up.
Yeah. And to kind of push this a little bit, from a design perspective, you could say, well, okay, let's say we create the kind of like technological equivalent of like 5-MeO-DMT or something like that, like really like this explosive change in experience, and we discover, wow, well, we can really like blow someone's mind out of their ear hole, but and they have this really dramatic kind of awakening experience, but then their life after that is confused, they're lost, they don't know how to make sense of that experience, and we actually discover that that intervention alone is not enough. And so then you could imagine, let's be optimistic about this, that you actually had a whole sort of research lab devoted to this, where you had serious meditation teachers, you had techie guys, you had neuroscientists, you had psychologists, you had sort of the best team that you could imagine working on this problem. Well, then naturally you would go back to the table and you'd say, well, actually the tech is kind of broken. Because it's not enough to just kind of pop someone on, but you have to deal with the integration aspect as well. And so could you not then go back and say, okay, well, let's design now sort of the ultimate holistic tool that actually covers both the integration aspect and this sort of dramatic shift in experience, so that we could create the kind of truly integrated approach to really rapid fire kind of awakening. Like, can we keep designing it to get better and better and better? Is that possible?
To me, it's like asking, can we have babies faster? Humans are organic, beings, and stuff just takes time to filter through the, garden of neurons and, have its blossoms awaken or whatever. And, as soon as you start improving the technology to include the integration, all of a sudden, I bet it will slow down.
So this is great. I was hoping we'd get into like a little thing here. Okay, so, okay.
Gaze into my eyes, Mikey.
So, I'll paint a different picture. Imagine you have 1,000 years ago, right? You've got a teacher, a really well-respected, well-loved teacher, teaching in a Buddhist tradition. And people travel from all around to sit with this teacher because this teacher is so effective at pointing out the deeper nature of our human experience. Students that go and work with this teacher are able to have really rapid progress along their contemplative path. And then you have, at the same time, this new teacher, just out of Buddhist university, who is just starting to teach, and they have some students trickling in, and what they discover is that they're nowhere near as effective as this seasoned teacher. And so naturally, this new teacher is going to try to figure out, well, how can I improve? What can I do to be a more effective teacher? And so they might sit and they might watch the seasoned teacher. They might learn from them, and they might say, oh, wow, that's a really good metaphor. I'm going to use that. Or they might say, oh, I need to speak a little more slowly. Or they may even say, oh, I'm realizing I need to sort of sit differently and hold myself differently. Or I need to make eye contact with the students in this way. And over time, through a learning process, what you might even call an innovation process, this teacher could become better and better and better at supporting the students along that contemplative path. And if you were to sort of study the effect of this, you might say that over the course of 5 years of doing this, that teacher becomes twice as good. So, is there something wrong with that? This idea that we can, through active innovation, through an intention to improve, actually create more skillful means to support one's awakening path. And if we do agree that that's like a useful thing to do, well, what's the limit of that? How much skillfulness is too much skillfulness?
I didn't even understand that last part of the question.
But if you just feel into my mind, then you'll get it. Wait, should I re-explain? I thought it was pretty clear. No?
Yeah, I wonder if we're using the wrong metric for skillfulness when we're talking about how fast it is. Maybe there are other metrics. It's not that that doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, we don't want to take a lot longer than we need to, but the effectiveness of fast might not be the most important metric. And yet, there's probably things we can do to speed stuff up and get better at integration. So, okay, I can play that game.
Well, okay. Well, sorry, go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, I sort of am with your thinking, Michael, on that integration is the harder part. Because awakening experiences are so, like a dime a dozen, in a way. Everyone here has had an awakening experience.
For Vince, they are, yeah.
I mean, you're born, you have an awakening experience. You're like, I'm here.
Vince has one every morning.
So do you. But then, what does it mean? Yeah, what does it mean? How does it change how I behave and how I am with people? How does the reality testing...
Why am I still an asshole?
Yeah, how are my ideals and the reality of my life intersecting or not? I'm all for tech augmenting and enhancing and supporting all of that process. But the other thing that seems distinct from tech is the culture or the intersubjective dimension of this too. Because different technologies have different social programming, the way that they use social or not. Like group flow is very social.
We're back to the social.
Yeah, hyper-social. And we're back to social because, where else do these things happen but in relationships with each other, when we're communicating and sitting on front of a stage, pontificating as if our opinions matter, that much.
Speak for yourself, dude. Mine matters. So, for the sake of getting into stuff, I'll come back with one more thing. So, first, I'll agree.
He's threatening.
I'll agree that that actually time is the provocative metric. It's the one that kind of like sparks conversation and kind of gets people on their edge. But it's not the main metric that I would use. Really?
Okay, now I'm interested.
Yeah. The main metric that I would use is actually this Buddhist notion of skillful means. And it's been variously defined, but the definition I've sort of settled in with is that intervention which most effectively supports the student on their spiritual path. And for one student that
while causing the least harm to others. Yeah.
Sure, while causing the least harm to others. And so that might mean more time, right? For all that I know, right? But what I am interested in is this idea of what does it mean to continually increase skillfulness? Because that's what that teacher is trying to do. As they become a better and better teacher, they're trying to become more skillful. And my sense is the best possible use of science and the best possible use of technology is to come up with increasingly skillful approaches to best nurturing, to best supporting the individual on their path in the way that they most need to be supported. And I don't mean just make it faster. What I mean is, what does it mean to be infinitely supported? What does it mean to design the most advanced, most holistic, most aware, informed approach to supporting a human being on their own unique transformative journey, and then multiply that times 1,000?
I'll throw out a provocative response.
Yes.
Sort of half joking, but half not. I think you could say that would sort of infantilize someone. You know, you turn them into like a spiritual genius / infant because, you know, it's like, I don't need to do anything. I just sit and push my button, you know?
But would that be skillful if you did that?
It depends. I guess it depends on by what definition of skillful, you know, how are we determining what skillfulness is?
Well, it sounds like you wouldn't consider that skillful.
If it prevents someone from being able to grow in other ways that require difficulty and adversity and being humbled, you know, like certain things that seem to only come when people really do have to like just eat dirt.
Yeah.
You know, head down.
You gotta suffer through it a little bit.
There's suffering builds. It's like a character building, you know, superpower. Just like turns people into saints.
I wish that were true.
Or it turns them into, you know, the opposite.
Cool. Well, I could keep harping on this for quite a while, as you could tell. But let's keep rolling. I have a feeling we're gonna circle back to this. So who was our other? Yes.
I'm trying to see. Is this on? Yes. Is it on? Okay.
Sounds on to me. Whoa. Okay.
It's 2 on.
A little too loud. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, you want to go? Yeah.
Just one shout out to Ken Wilber, who's the integral philosopher, because he has a really interesting distinction that I found helpful about state stages and structure stages. And the simple idea is that you can train in accessing different states of consciousness and become more fluid at that and have more mastery over your, you know, what state of mind you're in. Meditation's, you know, a great tool for doing that. And that does progress in a kind of stage-like or wave-like way. And that, once someone gets really good at it, then it's easy to just, okay, access this state, this state, this state. They're no longer these special, amazing states. They're just like, oh yeah, that's that state. So it's like, well, it depends on how close you are away from it, but yeah. Yeah, and then the other kind of stages are structure stages, which are more kind of deep developmental, related to meaning making, like how we start to experience the world in more complex ways and relate to more perspectives and be able to make sense of more of what's going on. And that seems to be something that does take often time. I wonder if the structure stage, some of these other kinds of stages of development do just take time. Maybe they can't be, we don't understand them well enough. I think the state stages could be accelerated because they are pretty straightforward in a lot of ways. Like once you can do something with your attention, you know you can do it and it's clear. And if a technology could help you do it faster, I would consider that very interesting. And as part and parcel of a larger kind of approach, you know, where there's some sort of intersubjective practice, there's some relationships, there's some way of talking about how do we integrate these insights into our lives. Like that, to me, is really interesting.
Yeah, you asked the question, what's the hurry? And obviously I'm advocating for us contacting the richness of the experience more than trying to speed through it. You know, it's not like how fast can we eat this beautiful dinner kind of thing. It's not the right question in one way. But in another way, you know, the fucking world is on fire, dude. Like, we're all gonna die, so there might be a real hurry to like change some minds. So.
And I'll throw one thing in. I'm like, oh man, I kind of pinching myself as the fast lane guy, which I guess I threw myself into the fire because I'm trying to rile things up a little bit. And actually, the tech that I'm building is like two people sitting and like eye gazing and like holding each other's heartbeat. But the thing that I am really passionate about is the ideas of time that we impose on human transformation. And whether it's about being too fast, like trying this idea that we need to speed it up, or it's the idea that we have to suffer this much for this long before we can finally be free, either way, it's a destructive limitation. Either way, it's a boundary that holds us back from freedom. And so what I'm an advocate of is not that we speed up or that we intentionally slow down, but we completely let go of any idea of what awakening is supposed to look like, or how long it's supposed to take, or what the process of integration is supposed to look like, or what path that it looks like in our lives, and that we open up to the very real possibility that we can create tools with the kind of skillfulness that actually is healthy, that actually is genuinely supportive of real deep human experience, that allows us to see radical shifts in human consciousness in our lifetime. Because if we don't hold that as a real possibility, then as Michael said, we're potentially kind of fucked. Because we really need it. We really need to shift as a humanity, our relationship to ourselves and each other. Otherwise, we do stand a real risk of killing each other. So, yes, I was hoping you were gonna get a couple of claps there. All right. Cool? Okay. All right. All right. Let's do another one. Okay. So I want to talk about the concept of technological dependency, which is usually one of the things that kind of comes out of these kind of conversations. So I want to first start by saying, just to get it out of the way, we're already dependent on technology. We have been dependent on technology since the advent of stone tools, since the advent of fire. Dependence on technology is one of the defining qualities of what it means to be human. We create tools, and then we use them, and we actually incorporate them into the way we survive. We have choices, though, about which technologies we choose to be dependent upon. And so I want to throw another little thought experiment at you. And it's this idea of imagining a brain implant. A brain implant that could actually dramatically deepen one's experience. Let's say for a moment, just to make it specific, let's say it could, actually I'm going to give you an example, a real example. There is a very real research project going on, funded by the government, that is trying to deal with people coming back from conflict, suffering from PTSD. And I forget the statistic off the top of my head, but there's a really mind-boggling number of suicides from veterans. It's something like one every few minutes or something like that, folks coming back from conflict. And there's a research project looking at actually creating a brain implant which would actively stimulate the part of the brain associated with negative emotion and would essentially turn off negative emotion. And this technology could actually save thousands, if not tens of thousands of people's lives. Save the lives of people who may not ever encounter meditation, may not ever encounter ayahuasca. This may be the only real effective intervention they may ever receive, and could actually allow them to live a healthy and productive life, but they would be dependent on this technology for the rest of their life. Not only would they be dependent on it, but for many of us in the room that are sort of devoted to kind of a bottom-up healing path, we might look at that and say, well, they never really address the underlying causes of their suffering. We're sort of just kind of cutting it out from the top down. And so this same kind of debate, this sort of pros and cons, you could also imagine in terms of contemplative experience. Kind of waving our hands a little and imagining a scenario where you could have a similar kind of brain implant that would, again, have the...
I do have one of those.
Well, obviously. Where you could have a dramatically deepened experience. But if that brain implant was ever removed, that experience would immediately be gone. And so the question that I'll throw out to you is, how do you feel about this idea of a technology which could have a tremendously positive impact, not just for folks suffering from PTSD, but just imagining for a moment that this would be a genuinely positive impact on anyone's life who had that implant in their brain. But if that implant was removed, your experience would go back to normal. Would you want that implant, and would you want that implant to be available for other people? So, to your neighbor, go. All right. We're gonna do it again. 2 more people. Let me just see what's happening here. Okay, so we got one right here in the front, and then we've got one right there. One more right there in the middle. Where'd our other mic go? Do we have one? Okay.
So I don't actually have an answer to this question. I was just hoping to prompt. It seemed pretty obvious in our group that we were not in favor of this technology that would eliminate negative emotions, but I was really hoping that somebody who disagrees would love to speak up, because I think that would be really interesting. So that's my answer.
Oh, all right. Wait, so we have Katie, who I think is responding to that, and then we'll do the one
Hi,
over
Katie.
here after.
Hi, Katie.
So I got really excited just now to talk because we all started out as just an absolute no. We were like, this is a horrible idea and we hate it. And then we talked about cochlear implants, and we decided, well, those are pretty cool, and the people who have them are completely dependent on them, but we wouldn't want them to have to give that up. Everyone knows what that is? Oh, this is an implant for people who are deaf so that they can hear. So we decided we're okay with those. And then we talked about deep brain stimulation for chronic depression. So this is a treatment of last resort if people have had crippling, debilitating depression, where they have invasive neurosurgery. There are only a few surgeons in the world who can do this. And they go down through the top of the head all the way down into the brainstem and put essentially a pacemaker in the brainstem.
Katie's a neuroscientist, so she knows what... I'm for real. She doesn't just play one on TV. Sorry, go ahead.
And this invasive neurosurgery gives these people their lives back. Like, they can get out of bed again and do things. So we decided, okay, we're cool with that, too. So we went from like an absolute hell no to all the way to deep brain stimulation in like 5 minutes. We had a good group. And then from there we went, okay, well, a cochlear implant gives you back one of the 5 senses. And we can all there's a biological, thing we can all agree on, where people who can't hear, if they're able to hear, they should have that. Chronic depression is more, there are biological correlates, but there's also a cultural, a societal thing that's happening there, where these people can't participate in society, and then they have this invasive surgery, and then they can participate in society. So then we were imagining a future society where, say, most of the people are awakened, and then is dependence on a technology that allows you to access that state. How do we feel about that? And then we ran out of time. So that's where we left off. Does anyone else, do you guys want to add anything? No? Okay, so that's how we moved from a fuck no to a yeah, probably in like 5 minutes.
Thank you, Katie. We got another one right over here. In the middle. Someone, I called on someone over there.
So we were talking a lot. I know you brought it up and you kind of touched on it, and it really kind of piqued my interest about kind of touching that button and people just getting that state so quick that it almost becomes slightly abused, where it's like, okay, I didn't really have to work for this. I just am accessing this. And I think that was something that came up in our conversation, and I would love to touch on that a little bit more. So that's my question.
Great. Good question.
We're sort of talking about two different things. There's right now, one is an enlightenment button, but the other one is a not killing yourself implant, right? And they're really different. And so the question
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm wondering about that as well.
So many of the enlightened people I know are anti-natalist, so I'm not sure. But even some of our really good friends.
Yeah.
So, if it's a matter of my mom has a pacemaker, and that thing keeps her alive. I really like that my mom's alive. And she has to give some stuff up to have that, and it was, painful surgery, and there's all kinds of complications with it, and so on and so on, and that's a, worthwhile sacrifice to stay alive. So under the conditions of your theoretical question, Mikey, where it's, this person would probably commit suicide otherwise, is it a worthwhile trade? I mean, of course, they should be the one deciding, but I could see a lot of people deciding, yes, that's a worthwhile trade, even though they're definitely giving something up. So I'm on the we need the not killing yourself implant. But I'm not sure about the enlightenment.
What about the, you wouldn't necessarily die, but what about the not suffering an emotional agony for your entire life implant? Which is the life that many people live.
Well, I mean, the early Buddhists, they set that up as pretty much the goal of enlightenment. That was one of the ways it was described, as you lose these certain negative emotions, these kleshas, they were called. And that's one way of interpreting the old texts, which is all we have really to know what these people were talking about. But it seemed to me, reading the translations I read, that they just didn't want to be suffering anymore. They didn't want to have negative emotions arise anymore, and they wanted to just be chill. And that was like the goal. And so I think for them, they would be like, yeah, hook it up, hook up that device. I'm ready to get rid of my negative affect. But then, what world is what are the actual outcomes of people not feeling negative affect? Like, could it be that negative affect is an important part of our organism and social structure? And it's getting rid of that, and a lot of people, if it were a widespread practice, like what kind of effect could that have socially? That would be like one of my first questions. A bunch of enlightened people, and then our economy screeches to a halt, and we're all starving. Because they're like, it's all good. The world is ending, but I'm breathing through it.
So, if that's enlightenment, I don't want it. Which actually, I say that to say that we're throwing these words around, right? Awakening, enlightenment, and probably if we were to take 5 random people and the 3 of us and put us in a little room and kind of ask, well, what do you mean by that? We'd probably get that many different answers.
It's true, my wife did this at Sounds True at a conference, and her job was to go and ask every one of the teachers and the speakers, what is awakening? And she said firsthand, all 30 of them, different answers. So, yes, that's true.
And I've seen and heard of some of the battle royales that have ensued when you get 30 of these teachers in a room and you try to actually have an in-person conversation about it, things can get pretty ugly pretty fast. So
don't do it.
So we're kind of this has been a problem, I think, for the history of contemplative paths. The debates about the ultimate aims of contemplative paths, even different sects of Buddhism, have been hotly debated for thousands of years, right? And we're kind of entering into this interesting zone where science is entering into the game.
And business.
And business. And so you've got a couple decades now worth of really active contemplative science or meditation research, which is beginning to map the meditator's brain and looking at states as deep as non-dual experience and sort of the deepest jhana states, and really looking at the larger and larger space that is encountered by long-term monks and meditators. And as science begins to build a model of what that looks like, then all of a sudden there's this way in which we're saying, well, this is what it is, and this is what it's not.
And here's the algorithm that'll help you attain it optimally.
And we've patented that state.
Or open sourced it.
So what, for you guys, what does that mean when all of a sudden we start really putting a stamp and saying this is the scientifically validated version of enlightenment?
The history of these spiritual traditions is partially a history of people fighting over what is enlightenment, right? At least verbally arguing about it, or dharma combating each other about it. So it's the question's never been satisfactorily answered ever, and I think even in this scientific definition that could be happening really soon, somebody's going to try to do that. We will find that it's like what they said long ago, which is just awakening's a multifaceted jewel. There's different types. There's different faces of that jewel, and there's sort of no end to it. It's not an end state, and so you've got this very complex thing that we're talking about, and there's a lot of different features. So I think that the science and even the, let's say, a capitalist aspect is going to just run up against that right away. And that might be the, added value of having lots of different enlightenment shops, as each one is offering something different. I don't know. Sounds possible.
Yeah, with the enlightenment button, I want to know who is selling this to me, who's giving it to me, how am I accessing it, from whom, and
who's defining the outcome.
Yeah, and what's the financial model? What's the business model? How does this actually work for them to produce this technology, to enhance it, improve it, to get feedback from their users, me, especially if they're going to be zapping my brain. And that stuff can be hacked if it's not properly encrypted. So, want some Chinese hackers, just sending me through hell states or whatever.
At the push of a button. Yeah.
It's like, dude, that hack earlier today really, really, really sucked. I had to take an equanimity tab to counteract it. Where was I going with this story? Can you remind me?
No one knows, Vince. Actually, I know, but I'm not going to tell you. I'll let you squirm for a little bit.
I want to know who's benefiting from me zapping my brain and getting into this state or training in this way, and what's the underlying model behind it? Because there's, the history of the web so far has been a history of failed idealism, largely to me, where people have brilliant ideas and a brilliant vision, and they tend to be very tightly focused on one area and not have a broad depth of understanding of other things like philosophy or contemplative awareness or those kind of things. Ethics. And then they build these, empires. And Silicon Valley's, very much, the history of Silicon Valley is a history of that now. And look at the rest of the world, look at our current situation, massive wealth inequalities, right? And people suffering tremendously, even in our own country, the homelessness. I remember I was hanging with my Croatian friend. Croatia's not a wealthy country compared to us at all. And we were walking down Santa Monica Boulevard or something. He's walking over top of the homeless population. And he looks at me at a certain point. I could tell he was pissed. He's like, what are these people doing on the street? Why are you not taking care of them? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, he's like spitting, with rage. And I'm just like, fuck. It's like something I'm not even that sensitive. I'm aware, of people. It's not like I don't feel. But it's like I'm just on the structural level, on the systems level of like, how is our system operating? It's like people, I think individuals, we get, desensitized quick. And, are we desensitized to the kind of hyper-capitalism that's driving a lot of the growth in technology right now? And do we want that to be part of the new technologies that we build? Or do we want to align our incentives better and start to become peer producers and start to create these things and give them away to each other and improve them and find new sort of models for working together? Michel Bowens, who's the peer-to-peer director, the director of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, he's got some tantalizing ideas, about this, and would highly recommend checking his work out. He talks about netarchical capitalism. There's maybe new ways that we can make a living, by all coming and self-organizing around projects and taking responsibility for certain areas and having our own autonomy to work on interesting things and move around and be part of collectives. I'm excited about the Dharma Collective because it's got that seed of possibility in it, where we can start to organize our organizing differently and organize it in a way that's more aligned with the kind of contemplative values that meditation and traditions have aimed for in different ways.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the history of the web and the idealism with which that started, and we all look upon the internet landscape, the flaming dumpster fire of the internet landscape right now, and wonder how we got from there to here. And I think a lot of people have a lot of answers to that question, but we can predict that that's what will happen with any kind of brain hacking technology, whether, molecular or silicon-based or any other basis, right? Any other substrate. Something similar is going to happen that all us, idealistic weirdos who've been doing this in our basement for, however long we've been doing it in our basement, with other people, in Vince's case. How are we going to learn from what happened so far in the internet realm and the tech realm? Like, how are we going to learn to avoid having it turn into, the Facebook of enlightenment? You press the enlightenment button and there's ads and, I don't want to live in that future, and we can predict, like that's the logic of capitalism, right? That will happen unless we actually take direct action to prevent that.
Thank you, guys. I couldn't agree more. The biggest questions I have when I imagine both the technologies that are being built now in this direction and the ones I imagine in the future is who's building it and why, the place from which it's coming. And people talk a lot about AI and a lot of fear connected to AI. AI, in a way, being this very literal kind of advancement in technology, but also almost symbolically representing sort of the pinnacle, the spear tip of human innovation in a way. And when I imagine 10, 20 years down the road, an AI more advanced than we can even conceive of right now, being born out of the greed and the fear and the fundamental sense of separateness that is inherent in so much of the startup culture that we live in, and that the AI is actually born out of that place, that's an AI that I'm fucking terrified of. But at the same time, there's this thought experiment of kind of what I call the Startup Ashram, where you have this incredibly well-funded workspace where you have the best engineers that anyone could get.
But hold on, how are you getting that funding?
Yeah. So, and including new models of funding, you actually are seeing, you're actually seeing, interestingly, we had Bo Shao, for example, speak a few meetups ago, who just announced a $100 million fund, which is coming at it from a completely different perspective, where the bottom line is not focused on profit, the bottom line is focused on social change. And if you, as a recipient of that funding, don't have a similar bottom line, which is focused on social change, then you won't receive the money in the first place. And that's the kind of funding that we need to move into, where you're only getting the money if your highest priority is actually creating a positive impact in the world. And you have that as the basis of funding, and then you have the engineers and the entrepreneurs, the people that are actually writing the code, who are engaged actively, both in their own practice, but also in interpersonal practice, learning how to be human, learning how to actually relate to each other, to work through conflict, to actually learn how to connect and to love their fellow human beings. And then from that place, that lived state of consciousness, then you write the code to build the AI of the future. And I don't know what that would look like, but I can tell you I would much rather live in a world dominated by that AI than the AI that comes out of current Silicon Valley startup culture. And so I guess we're gonna switch to...
Josh is trying to get your...
Yes, okay. So I think we're switching modes now to Q&A mode. So yes, I see an excited hand over here.
I was glad to hear you bring up AI, because that's been in my mind this whole time. AI is not only emerging right now.
Can you stand up, please?
Yes.
Thanks.
AI is not only emerging, through money and intention, but it's being built and mirroring that, right? And so going back to this idea of would people coming back from service who have trauma, could we, get excited about putting something in their brain and eliminating those bad feelings? And the whole idea of trauma is an interruption. And to eliminate somebody's ability to reintegrate and have them miss that process, I think is a reflection on our own anxiety about pain and discomfort and becoming unintegrated and working to become integrated. And so it makes me anxious to think about, AI being developed to reflect that kind of human that can't tolerate being disintegrated and then do the work and have the capacity and be supported to integrate. And I've been mindful that we have this subject, like psychedelics, technology, and the future of meditation, and a lot of our discussion has been technology, as opposed to psychedelics and meditation, which are more about disintegrating and integrating. And so I'm just aware of there being this sense that if we could just figure out how not to disintegrate, how we could figure out how not to feel pain, will be better. And I'm not sure that's true, and that makes me nervous.
Thank you. Mikey, I'm curious if you, and Michael as well, you know, what, if you all think part of this might be the tension between the old analog and digital duality. You know, it's like we're analog beings living in a digital world. And digital's, you know, characterized by always being on and being instantaneous, ones and zeros. And analog is, it's organic, it's slow, it's, you know, it moves in a different way and at a different pace. It almost seems like some of the tensions, you know, that have been coming up, you know, your question, or your, you know, contemplation, and the earlier one seemed to relate to like the difference of those two modes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely there's a difference in the modes, and there's sort of a cultural difference too. You know, there's with sort of the digital age, we also have this expectation of instantaneous response, right? And this increasing expectation of on demand, what we want when we want it. And you know, my observation is that part of what is happening right now that we're seeing all around us is that expectation put to service, as you said, of our, I would call it an addiction to distraction. And I think that there's a lot of finger pointing towards Apple, towards Facebook, towards Google, towards many of the apps that exist out there in the world, who are creating genuinely addictive technologies that are largely distracting us from our own experience. But I want to say that we're not just victims, that it's a two-way street, and that my observation is that we are so afraid of feeling our own pain. We're so averse to actually feeling what it feels like to be us, because we're anxious, we're depressed, we're disconnected, that we will happily pay a subscription fee for the most addictive app that we can find, because it gives us that relief that we're desperately looking for. And so I think that's part of this digital culture that we're entering into, is distraction on demand, when we want it, wherever we want it. And I think that my hope, and what I would love to see as a technologist, is technology that is just as effective, but what it does is ultimately reconnects us to ourselves and each other. Robin.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, Vince.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I want to hear, the subject of death was briefly touched upon when, well, Michael, you said that you enjoy your mom being alive.
I do, yeah.
I wonder, with so much of what we're talking about here with technology and the avoidance of death, and the avoidance of, we've talked about the avoidance of pain, and so many of the ways we inch towards feeling better about technologies that we might not in our gut feel good about at first, that Katie mentioned, you know, well, this removes suffering, well, this actually stops people from dying. And when I hear this, a little context for me, a little bit ago, about a year ago or less, my sister died, and there's a way she came alive for me when she died in a way that was so new to me. And the more time I spend with dead bodies, the more death teaches me. And between the psychedelics technology and the future of meditation, two of these things seem to have a lot to do with death to me. And I'd like to know how the third can touch into death.
And the two that have to do with it are psychedelics and meditation. Yeah. The analog world. Birth and death.
What do you mean, touch into death?
The most powerful experiences that I hear people talk about in psychedelics and in my own experience are those where I let go, or those where people that I am talking to let go. Even with DMT and ayahuasca, people describe it as a death experience. On psilocybin, there's something, I can't quite name it. For me, it feels deathy. I always feel intimate with my own mortality. With meditation as well, there's an intimacy with mortality that is present. I don't see our technologies bringing us into intimacy with death and our mortality.
Yeah, in fact, the thing that Mikey was pointing to is that they are distracting you away from that thought over and over again. That might be one of the anxiety underneath all the distraction. Right? We don't want to think about mortality or old age or sickness, right?
Yeah, our groundlessness.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, there's a way that the whole purpose of technology is to keep you from noticing that. But it wouldn't have to be that way, right? I mean, the content is substrate independent, so we can use the technology to bring death, we'll give you some deathiness on demand, Robin, like if, it seems like that would be totally doable. I mean, you can already go on the internet and watch, endless hours of people being murdered if you want, but obviously that's not what you mean. But we can bring that kind of seriousness and clarity and, sitting with the real into technology, certainly. And we should be doing it a lot more. It doesn't, sell ads.
So just to kind of follow up on what you said, why wouldn't we want to simulate and get comfortable with death? Why are we all opposed to it? It's going to happen to all of us. So why couldn't we use technology to eliminate some of this anxiety and make it a positive instead of a fearful thing that's going to happen? Can you help us with that?
I mean, it is going to happen. I heard your point. Yeah, I was just thinking about still fearful. I still fear death, even though I've died 1,000,000 times.
This is for me actually one of the distinctions between the singularity perspective on the role that technology plays, and then sort of what I see is sort of the consciousness hacking perspective on the role of technology. And for me, my observation is that from a singularity perspective or humanity plus perspective, what we're really trying to do is live forever. Which when I hear that, what I hear is that we want our ego to live forever. And I actually think that there's a distinct lack of freedom in that. And I think that one of the greatest roles that technology could play is actually to bring us face to face with our humanity, with the fact that we will die. And I think actually virtual reality could be an incredibly useful tool for that. As you were talking, one of the interesting VR experiments came to mind where actually someone is sort of puts on glasses and they have to actually walk right up to an edge, and they look down and there's like a 1,000-foot drop. And of course it's virtual reality, but I forgot, it's something like 70% of people will not take that step off the ledge. But to be able to, and this is just the simple kind of technology that's already available, but to be able to face that, and then to push yourself and to actually be able to jump off of that, that's the kind of experience that's actually already beginning to be available, to begin just tastes of facing your mortality. But I think that there's a lot more that could be done. Standing excitedly in the back.
Why do you think that we need technology to help us We have wakes for 3 days, in house. The body's just there on the bed, literally for 3 days. People come to visit, people chat, people talk around the dead body. Like there's nothing that's uncomfortable about that. Like we don't need technology to teach us that. We just need to unlearn things.
One thought here is, where is a technological intervention appropriate? Where is cultural, change needed? Because obviously, you spent time in India, Michael, and practicing and being in that culture, and it's clearly got a very different relation. They've got very different relationship to death and dying. I mean, in the river, the Ganges, you're like, there's death.
Yeah, it's much more visible there. I remember having that thought walking next to a highway one time when I witnessed someone just get basically smashed by 2 trucks, right in front of me, boom, which was really intense, and that just wasn't that uncommon of an experience, like in that particular spot. But even more so, for example, when my teacher that I had been with for a long time passed away, we, sat with his body for days and then took it literally out back and burned it. So it was very direct and intimate and ongoing connection with death going on there. And I agree. I mean, I wish we had those cultural practices here but we've systematically kind of pushed that away. And if, for example, a technological reminder of that could begin the processes of, waking people up to the potentially interesting and beautiful and powerful things there that could start to maybe change the culture towards that.
There's something, just to add on real quick, there's a virtual philosopher of virtuality named Michael Heim, and he's also a Taoist Tai Chi practitioner, long time. And he said there's a principle in Taoism where if you push something far enough, it flips into its reverse or into its opposite. And Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist, also included that observation as part of his tetrad of media effects, the things that new technological mediums do. They enhance certain things, they make other things obsolete. They retrieve things that were obsolete from the past, and then they also can flip or reverse into an extreme or to a new state when they're pushed to the extreme. And I think the VR thing is interesting where, you say you could be in a virtual morgue, witnessing a dead body, and it could be an actual visual image of a real dead body. And, that's an early Buddhist practice, to sit in the charnel grounds and to contemplate dead bodies as your object of focus, and to develop, a deep, penetrating concentration on the contemplation of real live death. And I could see in VR, and Michael talked about this, you could push VR to the extreme where you are able to have these simulated experiences that aren't quite real, and that can actually push you into wanting to have the real experience. He talked about that in terms of the Japanese tea ceremony, and that you could imagine this VR tea ceremony with all the intricate ritual and the beautiful sensory experience of it, and that could be perhaps something that would inspire people to be in relationship to nature in a different way, because it's itself this microcosm of natural relationships. And I thought that was like a really interesting and beautiful idea. I wonder, what the reality is going to be when people start to be able to simulate all these different scenarios. Anyway.
Thanks, guys. Okay, we'll do one more question right here in the aisle. The glasses? Yeah, the glasses. You with the glasses.
So I guess one of my questions is, I look at these 3 topics and I feel like the people that are talking about these topics in general in our culture, it's a very demographically homogenous group. And I think the comment that came from back of the room is really valuable and such an amazing display of kind of how we're missing so much perspective that happens from around the world. And I guess I'm wondering, how do we expand the representation of different viewpoints and broaden these topics and the people that are talking about them, particularly around psychedelics, which I feel like is really dominated by white men, and technology, which is dominated by like American perspectives. So yeah, how do we use other people's viewpoints and widen these topics?
I have a hunch that you might have a good answer to that question. Really? You don't? Do you have any thoughts? It seems like something you're passionate about.
I'm passionate about it, but I think that mostly comes into making me realize that my own biases and my own background prevents me from really being able to see the right answers.
Well, not mine. I'm just kidding.
I'd just say open source again, because this is an actual way to make something more accessible to anyone who can gain access to whatever the digital schematics are, the digital instructions. And they can take that and they can modify it, make it their own, find out how to express it in their own cultures of meaning. I think that's one practical way, Again.
And part of it is just having the intention. Something that's really exciting about right now is that we have access to the information and experience of these awakening technologies in just a much, much greater amount than it was in the past, right? Ever before. We know about more ways to work. We have access to real teachers. We have so much information about all this, right? And so what's so interesting to me there is that it can be made personalized, right? You can personalize it for you or your community. You can customize it, like what are we working with? And you can build in those intentions, like, well, we do want to have women's perspectives. I mean, my God, it's all male perspective with this stuff, right? So how about some women's perspectives? How about some perspectives from other cultures? And you actively seek that out in the menu, you're creating. So I think together with the open source, which is part of making it all available, we also reinforce to each other that there are a lot of viewpoints out there that aren't getting that represented currently, and that probably would be really, really healthy to definitely be really healthy to include in the mix. And so that's part of the, democratization of awakening part, or the fact that we kind of have a little bit more control over this than we ever have, and that's a great place to exercise it. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is a real concern, and it's something that I don't have an answer to, and I can see the bubble that I'm living in, and I don't know how to get out of it. So, if anyone has any ideas, give me some answers.
You'll get plenty of those.
Okay, this is our last one. Oh, you don't want a question anymore? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
See, I told you you'd get some answers.
Answers, great.
Sorry, I'm actually really shocked that nobody has better answers to this, and it shows just how privileged of a conversation that we're having here in this room, because both open source and intention are incredibly privileged answers to that question. And there's a really great book I recommend called Emergent Strategies by Rene Marie Brown, who works in Detroit. The number one thing is we have to be extremely proactive about reaching out to communities. It's not just sitting back and thinking, oh, well, we mean well. No, it's getting out there and meeting people from vastly different backgrounds and cultures, and going into those cultures and sitting and listening and asking what they need, and then understanding that we won't actually know what they need, and then inviting them into positions of power into the organizations that we're running, so that they can influence the decision making around that even if they don't have the skill sets that you might think is required to run your next blockchain startup that's going to end poverty, you should invite somebody from the community you're trying to impact into a position of power into that organization. So that's one strategy. I think that all of us need to get out of our bubbles and go into our communities. There's a huge diversity here in San Francisco and the Bay Area of different perspectives. And so anyways, I have a background in working in ending the drug war, and that's what brought me to working for the legalization of psychedelics. And I think that the number one thing I get so afraid of is that we forget the context of the drug war. So psychedelics isn't just this like, oh my God, we're so blessed and we're just gonna like drink ayahuasca in circles. There are people in jail in California for selling cannabis currently, while people are making millions of dollars. So I would really encourage people to be highly proactive in seeking a vast diversity of perspectives and getting to know people and their needs and serving them and their needs, not thinking that we have the answer.
Thank you. Okay. And I think we got time for one more question. Let's do it right here in the front. Oh, to answer the thing? Okay.
Please.
Do we have Mike?
So we've talked about integration and how powerful integration is. Like you've had this enlightened experience and everything. So part of that integration process is all this amazing insight you might have. How do you decide to share it? How do you decide to bring the gifts that all this amazing understandings that you have, and then seeing how to share it with every connection that you have, and making sure that it's not just, I have this great idea, everything, but it's about consent. It's about like, hey, I really think this is really cool. How do I share it with you in a way that is building bridges? In a way that, okay, two people, it's not about like, oh my God, yeah, you should go drink ayahuasca. It's about like, let me understand your pain. Let me hear you. And then maybe we can talk about how can we get to a better place together. That is the integration. That is what the path to enlightenment is, or whatever it is about. You've had this amazing experience. How do you share it with everybody? How do you share it as you go deeper and deeper and you spread the ink into the water and not just expect that, oh yeah, like I dropped this ink into the water, it should go everywhere quickly. It is about how does that interaction need to happen and spread.
Well, thank you. Okay. I think it's time to be wrapping it up. I wanna.
Sure.
I'm gonna kind of pass it over to Michael and Vincent for any final comments that they want to make, and then Kim's going to come up and do a quick little thing with us.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing in response to the. Sorry, I couldn't see how old you are, but you seem like a young woman to me, and I'm a youngish man, so. So thank you for your comment. I wanted to say one thing, which is, I grew up in the rural South with a Arabic family. So we were kind of part white, we sort of jokingly now call ourselves like mayo with olive oil, my cousins and I. We're in this sort of multi-mixed family upbringing in the Southern Baptist South. It's a very weird mix of realities. And out of that, I really sort of saw the usefulness of being able to understand very different realities, not even different worldviews, people are living in different realities that come from very different religious and cultural backgrounds. And those realities don't always, they don't always meet, and they are difficult to sit in the tension of two different ways of knowing and ways of experiencing. And I love that you suggested that. And I'd say, there's almost like a tension or conflict in these two modes. One is, wanting to find people who are doing things like I'm doing and finding my niche, my people, my, tribe, whatever, my like-minded, everyone uses those terms that, they're looking for like-minded people. And that is, it can be useful for learning certain things and deepening in certain ways where you kind of just immerse yourself in that reality, but then it cuts you off, right? It also cuts one off from different perspectives because I'm not focused on that, I'm focused on this. And in a way, you know, what you're describing, I feel like is the move, you know, if this is the move of like transcending or innovating or pushing the edges, this is the move of compassion. It's like including, going back and making sure we're not leaving anyone else out of this vision. If this vision is really good, then it should be totally good for, you know, for all that want to participate in it. And so I think what you're saying is really important. I recently moved down from the mountain, literally and figuratively, from progressive community that I was in to, you know, much more, you know, a community that is, racial tensions and issues are very, you know, daily come up, and it's been great, you know, to do that, to come down off the mountain and be humbled by seeing how different other people's reality are, and to listen, to start to ask questions. So thanks for bringing that up. It's really important. That's what I want to say.
I'm happy to answer a question. I don't feel like I have a major like summary statement.
Well, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. And thank you to all of you. This has been fun, and I hope it was of benefit to you. Kind of intentionally shaking things up a little bit, trying to bring in some of the more provocative ideas that are in this space, because there is in many ways an exciting and in many ways a scary set of possibilities that we're looking at. And my hope is that being able to have this conversation and really feel the pressure of it, the stress of it, the tension of it, that it actually puts you in a better position to look forward and think about the future that you want to create and that you want to live in. And I don't think that there's any best thing or number one thing that humanity needs. It's not technology, it's not more meditation, it's people like you who are coming alive and doing the greatest good that you can in the world. And whether that's making tech, or whether that's teaching meditation, or whether that's being an artist, or whether that's legalizing psychedelics. And so I hope that this conversation was in service to you doing the greatest good that you can. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.